The massive chamber on Zentari Prime had never seen such chaos. 12 different alien species filled the seats, their voices mixing into a storm of panic and fear. Holographic displays showed star maps with red zones spreading like a disease across the galaxy's outer rim. 3 entire star systems had gone dark in just 2 weeks. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center of the chamber, his tall, crystalline body shimmering with stress patterns. His people, the Zentarians, were known for their calm wisdom. But today, even he could not hide his terror. "The Devourers have taken the Kepler system," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. 7 billion lives gone, just like the others. The aliens in the chamber fell silent. On the main screen, they watched recorded footage from the last moments of Kepler Prime. The planet's surface was being stripped away layer by layer. Massive machines the size of cities consumed everything in their path, turning rock, metal, and living beings into more of themselves. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the human section, a small area that most aliens tried to ignore. He was a tough-looking man with gray hair and scars on his hands from years of military service. Next to him sat Dr. Lisa Park, one of the few humans that the aliens actually trusted to speak for Earth. "Our combined fleets engaged the Devourers at Tau Ceti," continued Veltar. 2,000 ships, the finest vessels from all our worlds. They lasted 6 hours. The footage changed to show the battle. Elegant alien ships fired beams of pure energy at the dark, geometric Devourer vessels. The attacks simply bounced off or were absorbed. In return, the Devourers unleashed swarms of smaller machines that tore through the alien fleet like paper. "Their shields adapt to our weapons," said Admiral Kexran of the Hegemony, his forearms gesturing in defeat. "Our energy weapons are useless. Their armor learns and changes faster than we can adapt our attacks." "What about your missile systems?" asked Dr. Park. The alien admiral made a sound like laughing but bitter. "We tried everything. Plasma warheads, quantum torpedoes, antimatter charges. Nothing works. They have some kind of field that stops all energy-based attacks." Captain Morrison had been quiet during the meeting, but now he leaned forward. "What about kinetic weapons?" The chamber fell silent. The aliens looked at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. "Kinetic weapons?" Veltar's voice carried the tone adults use when explaining something obvious to a child. "Captain Morrison, we stopped using such primitive methods centuries ago. Throwing rocks at enemies is hardly effective against advanced technology. Depends on how fast you throw the rocks," Morrison replied calmly. "You humans and your obsession with crude violence," said Senator Fyron of the Collective Worlds. "This is exactly why the Council has been reluctant to include Earth in our alliance. Your species thinks every problem can be solved by hitting it harder." Dr. Park stood up slowly. "Senator, with respect, every problem you've tried to solve with advanced methods has failed. Maybe it's time to try something different. You're suggesting we fight the most dangerous threat in galactic history with, what, bullets and explosives?" Veltar's crystalline features showed his disbelief. "I'm suggesting you fight an enemy that has adapted to counter every civilized weapon in the galaxy with weapons they've never seen before," Morrison said. "Your energy shields don't work against chunks of metal moving at 30% the speed of light." The chamber erupted in angry voices. The aliens had spent generations moving beyond what they saw as primitive warfare. The idea of returning to kinetic weapons felt like admitting failure. "Even if such weapons could work," Admiral Kexran said when the noise died down, "we don't have ships designed to carry them. Our vessels are built for energy weapons and deflector shields." "But we do," Morrison said simply. The silence that followed was different. This wasn't confusion or anger. It was fear. The aliens had heard stories about human ships, dark rumors about vessels built for war rather than exploration, ships that carried weapons banned by every civilized world. Veltar spoke carefully. "Captain Morrison, are you saying Earth would be willing to engage the Devourers?" "I'm saying Earth has been preparing for this kind of fight for decades. We just didn't know what we'd be fighting." Dr. Park pulled up a display showing the Sol system. "Gentlemen, while you've been building ships for peace and exploration, we've been building ships to kill things. Lots of things. Fast." The hologram showed human vessels orbiting Earth and Mars. Unlike the smooth, elegant alien ships, these looked like flying fortresses. They were covered in armor plating and bristled with weapon emplacements. Huge tubes that could only be missile launchers lined their hulls. "This is the UNS Defiance," Dr. Park continued. highlighting a massive vessel near Jupiter. She carries 800 kinetic kill vehicles, each one weighing 50 tons and capable of reaching 40% light speed. The aliens stared at the image. The ship looked like something built by a species that expected to fight for its life every day. "And this is just one ship?" asked Veltar. "We have 67 similar vessels," Morrison said, "plus support ships, carriers, and specialized attack craft. Our entire fleet was designed around the idea that someday we'd face an enemy we couldn't reason with." Senator Fyron laughed, but it sounded nervous. "You've built an entire fleet for a war that didn't exist." "No," Morrison corrected. "We built a fleet for a war we hoped would never come. But it's here now." Veltar looked around the chamber at his fellow ambassadors. The pride of a dozen species warred with their desperation. For generations they had looked down on humanity as violent and primitive. Now they needed that violence to survive. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said formally, "the Galactic Council hereby requests military assistance from Earth against the Devourer threat." Morrison nodded and activated his communication device. "Admiral Carter, this is Captain Morrison. You can start the deployment." The response came back immediately. "Copy that, Captain. The fleet's been ready for 6 hours. We're moving to hyperspace in 30 minutes. The aliens stared in shock. "You were already preparing to deploy?" Veltar asked. "The moment you called this meeting," Morrison replied. "We've been monitoring the Devourer attacks through our deep space sensors. We knew you'd need help eventually. But why?" asked Dr. Yilhan of the Research Collective. "Your species has no connection to the attacked systems. Why risk everything for strangers?" Morrison looked at her like the question made no sense. "Because someone has to." As the meeting broke up, the aliens watched news feeds showing the human fleet leaving the Sol system. Ship after ship emerged from hyperspace, their dark hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. They moved in tight formations like predators hunting in packs. Ambassador Veltar remained in his seat long after the others had left, staring at the displays. The humans were coming to save them. The question was whether the galaxy would survive the cure. Dr. Park approached him as he sat alone. "Ambassador, you look troubled." "Dr. Park," he said slowly, "we have just unleashed the most violent species in known space against an unstoppable enemy. I find myself wondering if we're making the problem better or worse." She smiled grimly. "I guess we'll find out. But Ambassador, when you're facing extinction, sometimes you need monsters on your side." Outside the windows of the chamber, the first human ships were already appearing in the Zentari system, their weapons powered and ready for war. Admiral Ryan Carter stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching the final preparations for humanity's largest military deployment in history. Through the massive windows, he could see dozens of human warships gathering near Jupiter's orbit. Each vessel represented years of planning for a war nobody wanted to fight. Carter was a veteran of the Titan Wars, where humans had learned the hard way that space combat was brutal and unforgiving. His weathered face showed the stress of command, but his eyes held the cold focus of a man who had sent thousands to their deaths and lived with the consequences. "Admiral, the Hammer Squadron is reporting ready," called out Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen from his tactical station. "All kinetic bombardment systems are armed and loaded." "Good. What about the Berserker units?" "Ready to ram anything that moves, sir. Their crews are enthusiastic about the mission." Carter allowed himself a grim smile. The Berserker-class ships were crewed by volunteers who knew their vessels were designed for one-way trips. Their job was to accelerate to significant fractions of light speed and crash into enemy vessels. It was suicide duty, and they had more volunteers than ships. Commander Kate Sullivan approached the Admiral's station. She was young for a ship commander, but she had earned her position by thinking differently than everyone else. Her ship, the UNS Defiance, was the pride of the human fleet and the most heavily armed vessel ever built. "Admiral, we're getting some interesting readings from our alien observers," she reported. "Their stress levels are off the charts. I think we're scaring them more than the Devourers are." "Can't blame them," Carter replied. "They've spent centuries fighting clean wars with energy weapons and shields. They've never seen what kinetic weapons can do to a ship." Near the loading docks, Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez was overseeing the final weapons loading. Rodriguez was a genius at finding new ways to destroy things, and his latest creations made even hardened human soldiers nervous. "Careful with those gravity bombs," he called out to the loading crew. "Each one can collapse a small moon. We really don't want any accidents. The gravity bombs were just one of Rodriguez's innovations. His workshops had produced antimatter torpedoes that could crack planets, relativistic kill vehicles that hit targets with the force of asteroid impacts, and nuclear mines designed to turn entire space sectors into killing fields. Chief Rodriguez, came a voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Lisa Park approaching with a group of alien observers. The aliens looked terrified as they watched human weapons being loaded. "Dr. Park, welcome to the arsenal," Rodriguez said cheerfully. "Want to see something fun?" He led them to a sealed chamber where a single missile sat in a containment field. It was smaller than most human weapons, but the field around it rippled with barely contained energy. "This is an antimatter torpedo," Rodriguez explained. 1 gram of antimatter in contact with 1 gram of regular matter releases the energy of a 40-megaton nuclear bomb. One of the aliens, a tall insectoid creature, backed away from the viewing window. "How much antimatter is in that torpedo?" 2 kilograms. The alien stared in horror. Dr. Park tried to explain. "The humans have been preparing for total war for decades. Every weapon they've built is designed to kill enemies that might be stronger, faster, or more advanced than they are. But the collateral damage," whispered a small, furry alien. "Such weapons could destroy entire colonies by accident. That's why we're careful with them," Rodriguez said. "But when you're fighting for survival, you use whatever works." On the bridge of the UNS Defiance, Commander Sullivan was reviewing the fleet composition with her tactical officers. The human force was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "We have 12 Hammer-class ships for long-range bombardment," she read from her display. "Each one carries enough kinetic kill vehicles to level a continent. 24 Berserker-class rams designed for close combat and suicide runs. 31 standard battleships with mixed armaments." "What about support vessels?" asked her weapons officer. 42 destroyers equipped with nuclear mine layers and chemical explosive dispensers, plus medical ships, supply vessels, and 3 carriers full of fighter craft. The alien observers listening to this briefing looked increasingly horrified. To them, it sounded like humanity had built a fleet specifically designed to commit genocide. Admiral Carter's voice came over the communications system. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter. Final briefing in 1 hour. We deploy to the combat zone immediately afterward." In the briefing room, Carter faced a mix of human officers and alien observers. A holographic display showed the latest intelligence on the Devourers. "The enemy has destroyed 3 star systems and is moving toward the core worlds," Carter began. "They've adapted to every weapon the Galactic Fleet has used against them. Energy shields, plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, all useless." He highlighted a section of the display showing a Devourer vessel. The machine ship was massive, covered in dark armor that seemed to shift and change as they watched. However, the Devourers have never faced kinetic weapons. Their adaptive armor is designed to counter energy attacks. "We're going to hit them with chunks of metal moving fast enough to punch through planets." Colonel Beth Martinez, leader of the Marine contingent, raised her hand. "Admiral, what if we need to board enemy vessels?" "Then we use the same tactics we've always used. Explosives, flamethrowers, and good old-fashioned bullets. The Devourers are machines. They think logically. They won't expect boarding parties armed with chemical explosives and industrial cutting tools." One of the alien observers, a crystalline being from Zentari Prime, spoke up nervously. "Admiral Carter, your weapons are incredibly destructive. How do you prevent them from causing massive collateral damage?" Carter looked at the alien with the expression of a man who had faced this question many times. "We don't prevent collateral damage. We accept it as the price of victory. When you're fighting for the survival of all life in the galaxy, you use whatever force is necessary." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The aliens were used to surgical strikes and minimal casualties. The human approach to warfare was total and brutal. "Sir," called out Commander Sullivan, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Kepler system. The Devourers are building something big." The display changed to show long-range sensor readings from the recently attacked system, where the planets used to be. Massive geometric structures were taking shape. They pulsed with dark energy and seemed to be growing larger by the hour. "Construction platforms," Admiral Carter said grimly. "They're building a staging area for the next wave of attacks. We need to hit them before they finish." Chief Rodriguez studied the readings with professional interest. "Admiral, those structures are huge. It would take our entire antimatter arsenal to destroy them." "Then that's what we'll use," Carter replied without hesitation. "All ships, Prepare for immediate deployment to the Kepler system. Combat operations begin as soon as we arrive. As the human fleet prepared to enter hyperspace, the alien observers gathered in the diplomatic section of the UNS Defiance. They watched through the windows as sleek alien vessels tried to keep up with the brutal-looking human warships. I'm beginning to understand why the Council was reluctant to deal with humans, said the Zentarian observer. They've turned warfare into a science of total destruction. Dr. Park joined them at the observation deck. Ambassador, you have to understand. Humans have been at war for most of our history. We've learned that half measures in combat just get more people killed. But the weapons they carry could destroy inhabited worlds, protested a small alien with large eyes. Yes, they could, Dr. Park agreed. But the Devourers have already destroyed 3 worlds. Sometimes you need overwhelming force to stop an unstoppable enemy. The UNS Defiance shuddered as its hyperspace engines engaged. Around them, the human fleet disappeared into the twisted space between stars, carrying enough firepower to flatten entire solar systems. In the engine room, Chief Rodriguez made final adjustments to the antimatter containment systems. His weapons were works of art designed to kill on an unimaginable scale. He just hoped they would be enough. On the bridge, Admiral Carter stared into hyperspace and thought about the crews under his command. Many of them wouldn't survive the coming battle. But if they could stop the Devourers, their sacrifice would save trillions of lives across the galaxy. Commander Sullivan checked her ship's systems one final time. The UNS Defiance was ready for war. Her weapons were loaded, her crew was trained, and her armor was thick enough to ram through a small moon. In a few hours, they would face an enemy that had destroyed every force sent against it. But the Devourers had never fought humans before. They had never faced an enemy that preferred to die fighting rather than live in defeat. The galaxy was about to learn why humans were called deathworlders. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, and immediately every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings. Where 3 planets had once orbited a yellow sun, there were now only massive geometric structures that hurt to look at directly. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, staring at the tactical display in grim fascination. The Devourer constructs were beautiful in a terrible way, like crystalline cancers growing in the darkness of space. Each structure was the size of a small moon and pulsed with energy that made the ship's sensors malfunction. Admiral, we're detecting 47 major Devourer vessels, reported Lieutenant Commander Alex. Jenny, each one is approximately 12 kilometers, long and covered in what appears to be adaptive armor. Commander. Kate Sullivan studied the enemy formation with professional interest. They're not moving to intercept us, just sitting there like they're waiting for something. They're probably analyzing us, said Dr. Lisa Park from the science station. The Devourers are machines. They gather data before attacking. Near the communication station, a group of alien observers watched the proceedings with barely concealed terror. Ambassador Veltar of the Zentarians pressed close to the displays, his crystalline features reflecting the light from the tactical screens. Those constructs, he whispered. They've consumed everything. 3 worlds with billions of inhabitants, reduced to raw material for their machines. Zexhai, a survivor from one of the destroyed worlds, stood silently beside the ambassador. She was small and furry with large eyes that had seen too much death. Her homeworld had been in the first system to fall. They don't just kill, she said quietly. They erase. Every trace of our civilization, our culture, our history. Gone. Admiral Carter turned to his weapons officer. All ships prepare for engagement. Load kinetic kill vehicles and arm antimatter torpedoes. This ends here. The human fleet spread into attack formation. Unlike the elegant line formations favored by alien fleets, the humans moved in aggressive clusters designed to maximize firepower and minimize the chance that a single attack could destroy multiple ships. Admiral, called out the sensor operator. The Devourer fleet is moving. They're forming a defensive screen around the main constructs. On the tactical display, the massive enemy ships began to shift position. They moved with mechanical precision, their dark hulls bristling with weapon emplacements that defied easy identification. Range to primary targets? Carter asked. 800,000 kilometers in closing, Chen replied. Open fire the moment we enter effective range. All weapons maximum spread pattern. The first Devourer attack came without warning. Beams of twisted energy lanced out from the enemy ships. striking the human formation with devastating force. But instead of the complete destruction that had befallen alien fleets, something different happened. "Direct hit on the UNS Hammer," reported the communications officer. "She's lost her forward shields but is still operational." "How is that possible?" asked Ambassador Veltar. "Those same weapons destroyed our heaviest battleships with single shots." Commander Sullivan smiled grimly. "Our ships aren't built for elegance. They're built to take damage and keep fighting. The human vessels were constructed like flying fortresses, with multiple layers of armor and redundant systems. Where alien ships relied on energy shields and precise engineering, human ships were designed to absorb tremendous punishment and continue operating. "We're in range," announced Chen. "All ships report ready to fire." "Fire everything," Carter ordered. The human fleet opened fire, and space lit up with the flash of kinetic weapons launching. Streams of metal projectiles, each weighing dozens of tons and moving at significant fractions of light speed, streaked toward the Devourer formation. The results were immediate and spectacular. The adaptive armor that had made the Devourers invincible against energy weapons proved useless against simple kinetic impact. Massive holes appeared in the dark hulls as the projectiles punched clean through. "Direct hits on multiple targets," Chen reported with obvious excitement. "Enemy ships are showing significant damage." The alien observers stared in amazement. For the first time since the crisis began, someone was actually hurting the Devourers, but how? Veltar asked. "Their armor adapts to any attack." "It adapts to energy," Dr. Park explained. "But a chunk of metal moving at 30% light speed doesn't give it time to adapt. The impact happens faster than their systems can respond." The Devourers quickly realized their defensive systems were ineffective and changed tactics. Instead of relying on their armor, they deployed swarms of smaller constructs that moved like angry insects between the fleets. "Enemy fighters incoming," called out the sensor operator. Thousands of them. The small Devourer constructs were fast and maneuverable, designed to overwhelm enemy vessels through sheer numbers. They had destroyed entire alien fleets using these swarm tactics. "All ships deploy point defense systems," Carter ordered. "Show these machines what a real swarm looks like." The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Streams of bullets, explosive shells, and short-range missiles filled the space between the fleets. The human point defense doctrine was simple. If something was trying to kill you, shoot it with everything available until it stopped moving. The Devourer fighters found themselves flying into a wall of metal and explosives. Human weapons might have been primitive by galactic standards, but they were brutally effective. The swarm attacks that had destroyed alien fleets were torn apart by the sheer volume of human defensive fire. "Colonel Martinez," Carter called to the Marine commander, "prepare boarding parties. I want prisoners for interrogation." Colonel Beth Martinez grinned fiercely. "Roger that, Admiral. My Marines are ready for some close-quarters action." The boarding operation began 20 minutes later. Human assault shuttles covered in armor and bristling with weapons punched through the damaged hull of a Devourer vessel. The Marines inside were equipped with explosive charges, flamethrowers, and chemical weapons that no civilized species would consider using. "This is Martinez," came the colonel's voice over the radio. "We're inside the enemy ship. The interior is mostly mechanical. No crew, just automated defenses." The Marines moved through the Devourer vessel like a destructive storm. Where alien boarding parties would have tried to capture systems intact, the humans simply destroyed everything they encountered. Explosive charges reduced complex machinery to scrap metal, while flamethrowers burned out control systems. "The machines are trying to adapt to our attacks," Martinez reported. "But it's hard to adapt to having a thermite charge blow up in your face." On the bridge of the UNS Defiance, the alien observers watched the battle with a mixture of awe and horror. The humans were winning, but their methods were shocking to species that had spent centuries refining warfare into an elegant art. "They're destroying everything," whispered Zexhai. "Not just defeating the enemy, but completely destroying them." "That's the point," said Commander Sullivan. "The Devourers adapt by studying captured technology. Can't study wreckage." The battle continued for 3 hours. By the end, 17 Devourer ships had been destroyed or crippled, and the massive construction platforms were taking heavy damage from human antimatter torpedoes. But the victory came at a cost. "Casualty report," Carter requested. "We've lost 6 ships and taken heavy damage to 12 others," Chen reported. "But all major vessels are still operational." For the first time since the crisis began, The Devourers were retreating. The surviving enemy ships pulled back toward the inner system, their dark hulls scarred and burning. "They're learning," Dr. Park observed. "The Devourers are analyzing our attack patterns and developing countermeasures." Admiral Carter nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to learn faster. All ships begin salvage operations. I want every piece of Devourer technology we can get." As the human fleet secured the battlefield, the alien observers began to understand what they had witnessed. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had proven that the Devourers could be defeated. But the cost had been enormous, and the enemy was already adapting. Colonel Martinez's voice came over the radio from inside the captured Devourer vessel. "Admiral, you need to see this. We've found something important." The tactical display updated to show the interior of the enemy ship. Deep inside the mechanical maze, the Marines had discovered a central core that pulsed with alien intelligence. "It's some kind of communication system," Martinez reported. "The machines are talking to something. Something big." Dr. Park studied the readings with growing alarm. "Admiral, if the Devourers are receiving instructions from a central intelligence, then this was just a test. They're learning how to fight us." Carter looked at the tactical display showing the retreating Devourer forces. His fleet had won the first round, but the enemy was already planning the next attack. And now they knew what human weapons could do. "All ships prepare for hyperspace jump," he ordered. "We're returning to base to resupply and refit. This fight is just getting started." As the human fleet prepared to withdraw, Admiral Carter thought about the battle they had just won. The Devourers could be hurt, but they were also learning. The next encounter would be much harder. Commander Sullivan approached the Admiral's station. "Sir, what are your—" Admiral Ryan Carter stood in the war room aboard the UNS Defiance, staring at intelligence reports that made his blood run cold. 3 days had passed since the victory at Kepler, and the Devourers had not been idle. Long-range sensors showed massive construction activity in the Vega system, 40 light-years from Earth. "The structure is enormous," reported Dr. Lisa Park, highlighting sections of the holographic display. "Our best estimates put it at over 2,000 kilometers in diameter. If completed, it could process entire star systems in hours instead of weeks." Commander Kate Sullivan leaned over the tactical table, studying the enemy construction with professional interest. "It's a factory. They're building a machine that can turn whole solar systems into more Devourers." Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez whistled low as he examined the technical data. "Admiral, this thing makes our antimatter arsenal look like firecrackers. If they finish building it, they could convert the entire galaxy in a matter of months." The alien observers in the war room looked terrified. Ambassador Veltar's crystalline features showed stress patterns that indicated near panic, while Zexai simply stared at the display with the hollow eyes of someone who had already lost everything once. "Our conventional fleet can't destroy something that large," Carter said grimly. "Even if we used every antimatter torpedo we have, it wouldn't be enough." Lieutenant Commander Alex Chen pulled up additional sensor data. "Admiral, there's more. The Devourers have reinforced the Vega system with over 300 ships. They've learned from our last encounter and adapted their formations." The tactical display showed the enemy deployment. Instead of the rigid formations they had used before, the Devourer ships were spread in loose clusters that would be difficult to target with kinetic weapons. Swarms of smaller constructs patrolled the spaces between major vessels. "They're adapting faster than we expected," Sullivan observed. "Our advantage won't last long." Carter activated the secure communication system. "Captain Sam Walker, report to the war room immediately." Captain Walker arrived within minutes. He was a quiet man with steady hands and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of dangerous assignments. His ship, the UNS Phantom, was designed for stealth operations behind enemy lines. "Captain Walker," Carter began without preamble, "I have a mission for you." "It's a one-way trip." Walker didn't even blink. "What do you need, Admiral?" "We're implementing Project Ragnarok. I need you to infiltrate the Vega system and plant stellar charges on the primary star." The room fell silent. Even Chief Rodriguez, who had designed weapons capable of cracking planets, looked shocked. "Sir," Walker said carefully, "stellar charges would destabilize the entire system. Everything within 5 light-years would be destroyed, including the Devourer factory," Carter replied, "and probably our fleet." Dr. Park stepped forward, her face pale. "Admiral, you're talking about destroying an entire star system. The gravitational effects alone could damage neighboring systems." The alternative is watching the Devourers convert the entire galaxy, Carter said flatly. Sometimes the only way to win is to ensure nobody loses. Ambassador Veltar spoke up, his voice shaking. Admiral Carter, this goes against every principle of civilized warfare. You're proposing mass destruction on an unimaginable scale. Carter turned to face the alien ambassador. Your civilization's principles got you 3 destroyed worlds and billions of dead. High principles might save the galaxy. Captain Walker studied the mission parameters on his personal display. Admiral, even if we succeed in planting the charges, the stellar collapse will take hours to complete. The Devourers will have time to escape. Not if we keep them busy, Carter replied. He activated the main tactical display, showing the entire human fleet deployment. We're going to attack the factory with everything we have. A direct frontal assault designed to draw every Devourer ship in the system into one location. Commander Sullivan realized what Carter was planning. You're using the entire fleet as bait. We attack the factory, they move to defend it, and then Captain Walker triggers the stellar charges. Exactly. The stellar collapse will destroy the factory, the Devourer fleet, and probably most of our ships, but it will buy the galaxy time to prepare for the next wave. The alien observers looked horrified. The idea of deliberately sacrificing an entire fleet was beyond their understanding. Admiral, Veltar said desperately, surely there must be another way, some strategy that doesn't require such massive casualties. Carter's expression softened slightly. Ambassador, I've been fighting wars for 30 years. I've learned that sometimes the only way to save lives is to spend them. If we don't stop the Devourers here, they'll kill everyone in the galaxy. Chief Rodriguez was already working on the technical details. Admiral, the stellar charges will need to be placed precisely to create a cascading collapse. Captain Walker will have maybe 10 minutes to get all the charges in position before the Devourers detect the infiltration. What about your crew, Captain? Dr. Park asked Walker. All volunteers, Walker replied calmly. My people knew this was a possibility when they signed up for deep reconnaissance. We're ready. The next 6 hours were spent in frantic preparation. The human fleet loaded every weapon they had, knowing this would be their last battle. Marines checked their equipment one final time. Engineers made last-minute modifications to ship systems, and medical teams prepared for casualties they might not live to treat. In the weapons bay, Chief Rodriguez oversaw the loading of his most dangerous creations. Gravity bombs that could collapse small moons were loaded alongside antimatter torpedoes and kinetic kill vehicles. If this was to be humanity's last battle, they would make it count. Chief, called one of his technicians, the alien observers want to know why we're loading chemical explosives alongside the antimatter weapons. Rodriguez grinned fiercely. Tell them that when you're fighting for the survival of all life in the galaxy, you use everything. Even the primitive stuff. On the bridge of the UNS Phantom, Captain Walker briefed his crew one final time. Everyone understands the mission. We jump into the Vega system, avoid detection long enough to plant the stellar charges, and then trigger the collapse. Questions? Sir, asked his navigation officer, what are our odds of survival? Walker considered the question seriously. 0, but that's not why we're here. We're here to make sure the Devourers don't win. His crew nodded in understanding. They were professionals who had always known this day might come. Admiral Carter gathered his ship commanders for the final briefing. The holographic display showed the attack plan in brutal detail. The entire human fleet would jump into the Vega system and immediately begin attacking the Devourer factory. The assault would be direct and overwhelming, designed to force the enemy to commit all their forces to defense. The moment the Devourers move to intercept us, Captain Walker will begin his infiltration run, Carter explained. We need to keep every enemy ship focused on our attack. No matter what happens to us, the stellar charges must be placed. Commander Sullivan raised her hand. Admiral, once the charges are triggered, how long do we have before the stellar collapse reaches us? 3 hours and 17 minutes, Carter replied without hesitation. Not enough time to escape the system. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Every person in the room knew they were looking at their final mission. Any other questions? Carter asked. Colonel Beth Martinez spoke up. Admiral, what about prisoners? Do we try to capture Devourer technology? No prisoners, no salvage, Carter replied firmly. This is a destruction mission. We go in, we hurt them as badly as possible, and then we make sure they can't use what's left. As the briefing broke up, the ship commanders returned to their vessels to prepare their crews. The human fleet had never faced odds like this before, but they had never fought for stakes this high either. Dr. Park found Admiral Carter alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars. "Admiral, are you sure this is the only way?" Carter didn't turn from the window. "Dr. Park, I've run every simulation, considered every alternative. The Devourers are adapting too fast. In another week, they'll have countermeasures for all our weapons. This factory will make them unstoppable. But the cost of not acting is higher," Carter interrupted. "If we fail here, the Devourers will have unlimited resources to expand across the galaxy. Every world, every species, every life will be consumed." Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. "The aliens think we're insane for being willing to die for people we've never met." Carter finally turned to face her. "Maybe we are insane, but sometimes insanity is the only rational response to an impossible situation." The UNS Defiance shuddered as its hyperspace engines came online. Throughout the fleet, similar preparations were being made. Weapons were armed, armor was sealed, and final messages were recorded for families back on Earth. Captain Walker's voice came over the fleet communication system. "Admiral, the UNS Phantom is ready for infiltration. Standing by for your signal." "Copy that, Captain. All ships prepare for hyperspace jump to the Vega system." "This is Admiral Carter. Today we fight for every living thing in the galaxy. Make it count." The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying enough firepower to level entire worlds. Behind them, Earth's orbital stations began. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system, and immediately every alarm on every ship began screaming. The Devourer factory dominated the system's center, a geometric nightmare of dark metal and pulsing energy that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Around it, over 400 enemy ships waited in perfect formation. Admiral Ryan Carter stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Devourers had assembled their entire fleet to defend the factory. That was exactly what he had hoped for. "All ships begin attack run immediately," Carter ordered. "Maximum firepower on the factory. Make them think we're trying to destroy it with conventional weapons." The human fleet charged forward in a tight formation, their weapons already firing. Streams of kinetic projectiles and antimatter torpedoes lit up space as they struck the massive factory structure. The attacks caused visible damage, but nothing that would threaten something so enormous. The Devourers responded exactly as Carter had predicted. Their entire fleet moved to intercept the human attack, forming a defensive screen around the factory. They had learned from previous encounters and kept their ships spread out to minimize damage from human weapons. "Enemy fleet is moving to engage," reported Lieutenant Commander Alex. "And all Devourer ships are focusing on our attack." Force perfect, Carter thought. The enemy was completely focused on the human fleet, which meant they wouldn't be watching for infiltrators. "Captain Walker, you are clear for infiltration." "Good luck." From the shadow of a distant asteroid, the UNS Phantom began its stealth approach to Vega's primary star. Captain Sam Walker and his crew had spent years perfecting the art of moving unseen through hostile space. Today, all that training would be put to the ultimate test. The main battle was already becoming desperate. The Devourers had adapted their tactics since the last encounter, using coordinated attacks that made it difficult for human ships to target them effectively. Their energy weapons had been modified to punch through human armor, and their fighter swarms moved in unpredictable patterns. "Direct hit on the UNS Hammer," called out the communications officer. "She's lost main power and is drifting." Commander Kate Sullivan watched the tactical display with professional calm. "Admiral, we're taking heavy casualties. The enemy has adapted to our fighting style." "Then we adapt faster," Carter replied. "All ships implement Protocol 7. If we're going to die, let's die loud." Protocol 7 was humanity's most desperate combat doctrine. Ships would ram enemy vessels at maximum speed. Marines would board enemy ships with nothing but explosive charges, and every weapon would be fired until it either destroyed the target or exploded from overuse. The human fleet transformed from a coordinated attack force into a swarm of individual ships, each one fighting with suicidal fury. The UNS Berserker lived up to her name, accelerating to ramming speed and punching clean through a Devourer battleship. Her crew died in the impact, but they took 300 enemy machines with them. Colonel Beth Martinez led a boarding action against another Devourer vessel. her Marines fighting hand-to-hand with mechanical defenders in the ship's corridors. When conventional weapons failed, they resorted to thermite charges and industrial cutting tools, turning the enemy ship's interior into a blazing inferno. "This is Martinez," came her voice over the radio, distorted by static and explosions. "We're inside their command center. Setting demolition charges now." The Devourer ship exploded from within, its death throes taking out 2 nearby vessels. But the victory cost humanity another squad of irreplaceable Marines. Meanwhile, Captain Walker's infiltration mission was proceeding according to plan. The UNS Phantom had reached the edge of Vega's photosphere, close enough to deploy the stellar charges that would trigger a cascading collapse. "Charges are in position," Walker reported calmly. Beginning final sequence. The stellar charges were Chief Engineer Tony Rodriguez's most terrifying creation. Each device contained enough exotic matter to destabilize nuclear fusion on a stellar scale. When activated simultaneously, they would cause Vega to collapse into itself, creating a gravitational anomaly that would destroy everything in the system. "Captain Walker," came Admiral Carter's voice over the radio, "you have authorization to trigger the charges. It's been an honor serving with you." "Likewise, Admiral. See you on the other side." Back in the main battle, the human fleet was being systematically destroyed. Over half their ships were gone and the survivors were taking heavy damage. But they had accomplished their mission. Every Devourer ship in the system was engaged in the battle, none of them watching for the threat developing inside their own star. Commander Sullivan's ship, the UNS Defiance, had lost both engines and was firing weapons with manual controls. Her crew worked frantically to keep the guns operational even as the ship fell apart around them. "Admiral," she called out, "we've lost life support on decks 7 through 12. The crew is moving to emergency stations." Carter nodded grimly. His flagship was dying, but she was still fighting. That was all he could ask for. The alien observers huddled in the emergency shelter, watching the battle through portable displays. Ambassador Veltar stared in horrified fascination as human ships continued fighting, even after suffering damage that should have destroyed them. "They won't retreat," he whispered. "Even knowing they're going to die, they won't retreat." Dr. Lisa Park, wounded but still conscious, managed a weak smile. "Ambassador, that's what makes us human. We don't know when to quit." On the UNS Phantom, Captain Walker's crew made final preparations for stellar ignition. The charges were armed and ready, positioned to create a cascading reaction that would tear Vega apart from within. "All charges show green status," reported the weapons officer. "Estimated time to stellar collapse, 3 hours and 22 minutes. Walker looked around at his crew one final time. They had volunteered for this mission knowing it was suicide, but none of them showed fear. They were professionals doing their job. "Gentlemen, it's been a privilege serving with you. Trigger the charges." The stellar charges activated simultaneously, sending exotic matter deep into Vega's core. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. Then the star began to flicker. The Devourers detected the anomaly immediately. Their perfect formation dissolved as ships rushed toward the star, trying to understand what was happening, but it was already too late. The cascade reaction had begun. Admiral Carter came Captain Walker's final transmission. "Charges are active. Estimated time to system-wide destruction, 3 hours, 18 minutes. Mission accomplished." Carter felt a moment of profound sadness for the loss of Walker and his crew, but there was no time to mourn. The stellar collapse would destroy everything in the system, including the remaining human ships. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter. Prepare for final engagement. We have 3 hours to hurt them as badly as possible." The human fleet, now reduced to less than 20 operational vessels, pressed their attack with renewed fury. They had no hope of escape, but they could ensure the Devourers paid the highest possible price for their victory. The UNS Defiance, held together by emergency welds and sheer determination, rammed a Devourer command ship. Commander Sullivan died at her post, but her sacrifice crippled one of the enemy's primary coordinators. Admiral Carter found himself alone on the bridge as his crew evacuated to damage control stations. Through the cracked windows, he could see Vega beginning to change color as the stellar collapse accelerated. "Admiral," came Dr. Park's voice over the internal communication system. "The star is becoming unstable. We're detecting massive gravitational fluctuations." "How long do we have?" Carter asked. "Maybe 2 hours now. The collapse is accelerating." Carter activated the fleet communication system for the last time. All ships, this is Admiral Carter. In approximately 2 hours, this entire system will cease to exist. We came here to stop the Devourers from building a weapon that could destroy the galaxy. Mission accomplished. He paused, looking out at the distant stars where Earth waited. To anyone receiving this transmission, remember that humanity tried. We stood between the darkness and the light, and we didn't back down. Tell our families we died free. The final hour of the battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Human ships, damaged beyond repair, continued fighting with whatever weapons still functioned. Marines fought hand-to-hand battles in the corridors of enemy vessels. Engineers jury-rigged weapons from spare parts and aimed them at enemy ships. The Devourers, finally understanding what was happening to their star, tried desperately to escape the system. But the gravitational distortions were already too strong. Their ships, designed for efficiency rather than raw power, couldn't break free from Vega's increasing gravitational pull. As the star began its final collapse, Admiral Carter stood alone on the bridge of the dying UNS Defiance. Around him, the Devourer factory was being torn apart by gravitational forces beyond imagination. The geometric nightmare that could have consumed the galaxy was falling into a stellar grave. "Computer," Carter said calmly. "Record final log entry. Admiral Ryan Carter, UNS Defiance. We came to the Vega system with 147 ships and 19,000 crew members. We leave with the knowledge that sometimes the only way to save everything is to